Chapter 14 of the Enchanted Barn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Mattern. The Enchanted Barn by Grace Livingston Hill. Chapter 14. The first few days in the new home were filled with wonder and delight for them all. They just could not get used to having plenty of room indoors, with all outdoors for a playground. Doris's cheeks took on a lovely pink, and her eyes began to sparkle. She and Harley spent all day out of doors. They were making a garden. Not that they had any experience or any utensils. There was an old hoe and a broken spade down in the basement of the barn, and with these Harley managed to remove a few square feet of young turf and mellow up an inch or two of soil depth. In this they planted violet roots and buttercups and daisies which they found in the meadows. Doris had a corner all her own, with neat rows of tiny stones from the brook laid in elaborate baby patterns around the edge, and in this she stuck twigs and weeds of all descriptions, and was never daunted, only pained and surprised when they drooped and died in a day or two and had to be supplanted by others. It had been decided that Harley was to stop school and stay at home with mother and Doris, which indeed he was quite willing to do under the glamour of the new life. The school itself never had much attraction for him, and the "fellows" were almost forgotten in searching for angleworms and building dams in the creek. Carol went to high school every morning with Shirley and George on the trolley. There were only 6 more weeks till the term was over, and it was better for Carol to finish out her year and get her credits. Shirley thought they could afford the extra car fare for just that little while, and so all day long mother and Doris and Harley kept quiet home in the old barn, and the meadows rang with Doris's shouts and Harley's answers. One day the doctor came out in his machine to see Mrs. Hollister, as he had promised to do, and found her so much better that he told her she might get up and go around a little while every day if she was careful not to get overtired. He prophesied a speedy return to health if she kept on looking happy and breathing this good air. He praised the good sense that brought her out into the country to live in preference to any little tucked-up house in town, and said if she could only get well enough to work outdoors in the ground and have a flower bed it would be the making of her. Her eyes brightened at that, for she loved flowers, and in the days of her youth had been extremely successful in making things grow. The doctor was deeply interested in the barn. He walked about with his hands in his pockets, looking the rooms over, as delighted as a child at seeing a new mechanical toy. " Well, now, this is great !" he said heartily. " This is simply great. I admire you people for having the nerve to go against conventionality and come out here. If I had a few more patients who could be persuaded to go out into the country and take some of the unused old barns and fix them up to live in, I'd have to change my occupation. It's a great idea, and I mean to recommend it to others if you don't mind. Only I doubt if I'll find 2 others who have the nerve to follow your example." The invalid laughed. " Why, doctor, I can't see the nerve. We really hadn't any choice. We couldn't find a decent place that we could afford, and this was big and healthful and cost less than the worst little tenement that would have done in town. Anyone would be a fool not to have come here. Mrs. Hollister, do you know that most people would rather starve and swelter, yes, and die in a conventional house, than to do such an unheard of thing as to live in a barn, no matter how delightful that barn might be? You are a great little woman, Mrs. Hollister, and you deserve to get well and to see your children prosper, and they will. They have the right spirit." After his visit Mrs. Hollister began to get up a little while every day, and her improvement in health was rapid. She even ventured out to see Doris's garden and watch the "birdie" in his nest in the tree. One day a drayman stopped at the place and left several great rolls of chicken wire and a couple of big crates. One crate was bigger than the other and contained half a dozen big yellow hens and a beautiful rooster. The small crate held 2 lovely white rabbits. The children hovered joyfully over the crates. " Mine wabbits !" declared Doris solemnly. " Nice Mr. Dwaham give Doris wabbits." " Did Mr. Graham say he was going to send you some rabbits?" questioned her mother. " Ess, he did say he was going to send me some wabbits. On the way from church in big autymobile he did say he would give me wabbits. Oh, mine wabbits !" Doris was in ecstasy. Mrs. Hollister looked at the big rolls of wire questioningly. " George and I told him we wanted some chickens. I guess that's why he sent 'em," announced Harley excitedly. I hope you boys didn't hint. That's very bad manners. You know I can't have Mr. Graham giving you such expensive presents. It won't do, dear." " No, mother, we didn't hint. George just asked him if he minded if we kept chickens here, and he said no indeed, he'd like to go into the business himself. He said he used to have a lot of his own when he was a boy, and he guessed there was a lot of wire from the old chicken run around at his place yet. If there wasn't any reason why it shouldn't be in use, and he'd look it up. He said if it was, he and we'd go into business. He'd furnish the tools, and we could do the work, and maybe some day we could sell eggs and make it pay." " That's very kind of him, I'm sure, but Harley, that looks like new wire. It isn't the least bit rusted." " It's galvanized, mother. Galvanized wire doesn't rust. Don't you know that?" said Harley in a superior man's voice. Harley and Doris were wild over their pets, and could do nothing at all that day but hover about them, and the minute George arrived the boys went out to see about putting up some of the wire and making a temporary abode for the creatures until they could get time to plan an elaborate chicken run. Before dark Graham arrived. He had brought a book on chicken raising, and had a good many suggestions to offer. With him in the front seat of the car rode a great golden brown dog with a white starred face, great affectionate eyes, and a plumy white tail. He bounded floppily out after Graham, and came affably up to the door as if he understood everything, and at the sight of him the children went wild. " I brought this fellow along, thinking perhaps you'd like him to help look after things here. He's only a puppy, but he's a good breed, and I think you'll find him a splendid watchdog. You don't need to keep him, of course, if you don't want him, Mrs. Hollister, but I thought, out in the country this way, it might be as well for you to have him on guard, at night especially. He'll be good company for the children. We've got so many of them that we want to give this one away." And what was there to do but accept him with thanks, a dog like that begging for a home, and a home like that really needing a dog? So the dog was promptly accepted as a member of the family, was named Star, and accepted the overtures of his devoted worshipers in many amiable waggings of tail and a wide puppy laugh on his face. He stayed behind most contentedly when Graham departed after a long conference with George and Harley over the chicken book, and a long discussion in the back yard as to the best place for the chicken run. He seemed to know from the start that he had come to stay, that this was his job, and he was on it for life. It must be admitted that Mrs. Hollister went to sleep that night with more content, knowing that big, floppy, deep voiced dog was lying across the door out in the living room. The hillside had seemed a bit lonely at night, though she had never admitted it even to herself before, and she was glad the dog had come. That night, in the little prayer that she said every night with all her children gathered about her couch in front of the fire, she added: "We thank thee, O Lord, for sending us such good kind friends to make the world so much happier for us." A few days later Mrs. Graham came to call. Her son did not explain to her anything about the Hollisters, nor say a word about the place where they were living. He merely remarked casually: "Mother, there are some people I'd like you to call on if you don't mind. They live out Glenside way, and I'll take you any afternoon you have time." " I really haven't much time now before we go to the shore, Sidney," she said. " Couldn't they wait till the fall when we return?" " No, mother, I'd like you to call now. It needn't take you long, and I think you'll like them. Her, Mrs. Hollister, I mean. Can't you go this afternoon? I'll call for you with the car anywhere you say, along about 4:30 or 5:00. It will be a pleasant little drive, and rest you." " Shall I have to be much dressed ?" asked the mother thoughtfully. " Because I shouldn't have time for an elaborate toilet. I have to go to Madame's for a fitting, meet with the Red Cross committee, drop in at the hospital for a few minutes, and see Mrs. Shepherd and Mrs. Follette about our alumni anniversary banquet." " Just wear something simple, mother. They are not society people. It's you I want to show them, not your clothes." " You ridiculous boy ! You're as unsophisticated as your father. Well, I'll be ready at 4:30. You may call for me then at the Century Building." Elizabeth had been loyal to her brother's commands and had said nothing about her new found friend, awaiting his permission. Graham earnestly discussed the pros and cons of woman's suffrage with his mother during the drive out, so that she was utterly unprejudiced by any former ideas concerning the Hollisters, which was exactly what her son desired her to be. He knew that his mother was a woman of the world, and hedged about by convention.